Hey guys, how you going? Thanks for being with us here today. We've got a real special video for you now. We're here today with Donovan. Donovan has a very interesting story. First off, thanks for being with us, Donovan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Donovan, your story is that you were working at a desk job, that you did not like. We'll go into the amount that you disliked it. And what you did is you decided to quit. And then 18 months later, you got a job at Google doing something that you had never done before, a completely new skill that you had never even encountered, which was programming. So in this interview with Donovan, we're going to talk a little bit about how he did that, what the steps were, his kind of journey through that, and give you some tips so you can hopefully do the same. Obviously, it's an amazing accomplishment, and yeah, I'm really fascinated to get into it.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, it doesn't feel as cool, but other people seem to be interested. So more than happy to share the details of that journey, and if it helps anybody out, that would be, ideal.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess first question for you, man, is getting into everything. What made you want to quit your job, and what made you think that you could? Because I talk to a lot of guys, and they're stuck in an office job and their desk job, and they want to quit, they want to move on to something else, but they have a lot of fear, and they're afraid that they can't leave. What made you want to quit, and what gave you the courage to be able to quit?
Yeah, so I think there's two distinct parts of that, and I'll start with kind of why I didn't want to be there anymore. And I was in a company where I was actually making a good bit of progress the first couple of years I was there. And I had gotten a promotion in the first 6 months or so. And then for the next year, maybe 2 years, I was promised that I was on the cusp of a promotion. Like, oh, you're just about to get this next thing. You're just about to get this. And it's not like I was making an exorbitant amount of money or anything like that. But, it was kind of that like sense of progress or fulfillment, or like, oh, I'm going to make it to the next level. But then over that time frame, more and more and more, it was like, I don't know that this is actually coming. Like, this seems like something I'm being told so that I don't leave. And so, I was kind of like wrestling with that as the timeline expanded. And the other thing that happened during that time, during probably that last year, is two people are out of the office for an extended period of time for some reason or other. And I had started picking up a lot of their responsibilities, and they were in different roles. So one of them was my manager, and one of them was someone else doing like some other type of work. And I started picking up a bunch of those tasks. So I was coaching the team. I was doing some of this other like marketing ad spend stuff that wasn't directly part of my job. And so I had gotten all these responsibilities, and then there was this carrot in front of me, like, "Hey, you're about to get promoted. It's coming. It's so soon. We just have to wait for the budget. We have to wait for this quarter. We have to wait for whatever. But it's coming." And then those people came back, the two people that were out of office for a while, and so when they were back, the responsibilities started going back to those people. And I realized one day I walked in, after they had been back for a couple months, and I literally had nothing to do. There was nothing that I was supposed to do for my job. And like, some people might have been like, wow, this is awesome. Like, I'm just going to hang out and get paid to do nothing and wander around and talk to people. But like, I was so frustrated because I had worked so hard, because a lot of those things were new to me. Like, I had never coached a team. I had never done any of this like marketing spend stuff in this realm. I had never done any of these things. So to me, it was like a very skill and growth oriented process. And when those were not only not rewarded because I didn't get that promotion, but also those responsibilities were taken away from me, I really felt just like, oh, I'm not doing anything here. So that's the piece why I really wanted to leave. And then as a side part, there has always been side projects that I've been working on, with the hopes of eventually completely doing my own thing 100% time. So there were these little projects that I had kind of been like marinating, and they weren't making anything crazy, but like a few $100s a month or whatever. So we have, this piece of, the job isn't quite what I'm expecting. It seems like I'm being, pulled along a little bit. We've got this piece of, oh, I've worked on these other projects. Sure, they're not completely financially viable. Like, I'm never going to live off of this, but maybe I could pour all my time and energy into these projects and make a living off of it. And then there was this piece of kind of how I felt like I could do it, the more logistics side, which is, I've always kind of had a pretty tight grasp on money coming in and out. And I've always been more on the saving side, mainly so that I have the flexibility. So the way that I look at money is like, I want to make sure that I have enough to be able to do the things I want. I look at money as a tool to freedom. And I know you can also buy all kinds of other things, but primarily as a tool of freedom. So I had saved up a bit of money, nothing crazy, but enough to cover my expenses at a bare minimum, because I had, I planned when I leave to like really cut out anything frivolous for I think maybe a year. And I had just saved that up over a year or two. Again, don't spend a lot. I'm not the kind of guy that like spends a ton of money. I was not making very much money at the time, but that's the big piece that allowed me to actually leave, which was, this pain of like, I'm not getting the promotion. I'm getting all these tasks taken away. Now I literally don't have anything to do at my job. I'm not learning or growing at all. And then the other piece of, okay, I'm not ultra rich. I don't have like $500,000 or anything stashed away, but I have, several tens of thousands. And like, I can siphon off of this while I figure things out. And it might have been different if I had a lot more responsibility or commitments or whatnot. Like if I had, a family that I'm trying to pay the mortgage and a new car and whatnot, but I had a car that was already all paid off. My rent was relatively low. And I had that money saved up. So that's what allowed me to feel okay leaving. And then of course there's a piece of like confidence, or I guess just trust, right? Just a piece of, okay, I don't know what these next few steps are, but when I look at legitimately the worst case scenario, which is I run out that entire budget, I run straight to $0, and then what do I have to do? What do I have to do from there? Get another job. Okay, well, if I get another job, what's it going to be? In the worst case, it's going to be a job where I'm not learning and growing and I'm not getting paid that much. Well, great. That was my starting point. So, at the time, I didn't have a whole lot to lose, but I still feel like even now, some of those lessons come with me, which is like, if I'm doing something I don't want to do, what are my options and what is the very worst case scenario? And most of the time it's not that bad, but that's only because I've set my life up in a way that I have kind of this pool of money, and like I have, it's just all money that I save from the job. But that to me is like this bucket of freedom that like, maybe I won't figure out the next step. I was lucky enough that in this instance it worked out, but maybe I won't. But I know that like I'm not going to, the next couple steps aren't like complete deprivation, starvation in the streets, homeless, poverty. Like I just get another job, and I have enough of an abundance mindset to recognize that like it might not be perfect, but there will be something. So I hope that kind of fleshes out some of the points that I'm talking for ages.
No, that's really really good. I often find with guys, they always say to me like, I find them in like two different camps. Like you've got guys that want to quit their job and they just want to quit it, and I would always say to them like, do you have savings? Do you have some sort of plan? Because I thought it was really important and relevant there that you said you had saved up money and that you were already good with your money and good with your spending. I think sometimes I talk to guys and they expect me just to go, yeah, do it, man. Believe. But you do need to have a background of savings and money saved away. Otherwise, you're just gonna like put your life into a bit of hell. Yet at the same time, I think a lot of people have like a deep psychological fear, and they have like just an insecurity and a limiting belief about them not being resourceful enough, or not, like you said, abundance mindset, having the ability to adapt and to find something new. And the way that you put it, like your opportunity cost of you were in a sucky job that you didn't like, and the worst case scenario is you take a break and not have a job, apply for one, and then get into another sucky job that you didn't like, which would be not the end of the world. So you're better to take the risk and do it, which is something I think a lot of guys need to hear, and a lot of guys need to really take action on. When you left, and then you had this period before you were, applying for another job, and you decided to want to do something else. Tell me a little bit about how your projects went, and then how that led you to get this new skill set.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I mentioned, I had some projects that were making a little bit of money, nothing crazy, not enough to live off of. So I kind of had thought, okay, so I barely invested in these because it was things I was working on in the nights and weekends. And when I say, like, when some people say that and they have entrepreneurial tendencies, they mean like every minute, every hour after, but like mine was just kind of like throwaway, like, oh, I'll do a couple hours here, and oh, I'm motivated now. So it wasn't a full-time effort, and it wasn't a huge investment. So I thought like, okay, I finally figured something out, because I had done many projects before that made no money. But like, I finally figured out something that makes, $100, $200 a month. If I go full time into the same thing, give me a month or two, I should be able to get it up to something sustainable, like minimalist sustainable, and then really push and then just keep growing from there. That isn't really how it worked out. So I did spend the first, month or two kind of like focused on that, putting more and more energy in there. And one of the big roadblocks I ran into, and I had ran into before this as well, was not knowing how to code or program. And that gave me problems in trying to build out my own stuff. It also gave me problems like, as part of that other job, I had saved up enough money to hire someone to build out a website that was completely wonky, garbage, horrible, didn't work at all. But I didn't know enough at the time to be able to say, like, at the outset, hey, like, I looked at your code sample, it's bad. Like, I don't want to hire you, right? I had already hired him. He had already made whatever the thing was. I had already paid him. And, like, then it was bad. So as I kind of progressed through the next couple months, I was looking at, like, okay, this seems to be my roadblock. I'm not figuring out how to make enough money to sustain things. Like, the savings is going to run dry, and I don't want to run it to zero because, like, that's when things start getting stressful. So I started thinking about things that I could do. And at that point, I knew that I didn't want to go back to the field that I was in. So, all those things together kind of pointed me towards, like, oh, you should figure out how to code. Like, go learn how to code. And what was the original question? I'm going to get off track. I'm just going to keep talking.
It was just how you sort of got from your project to then moving on to this new skill set.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. So
I really went in and learned it. Yeah.
I'm still on track. So, I was looking at kind of the options. Like, okay, how do you learn to actually code? Like, what do you need to do? Because, like, I had a website and I was messing around with it, and, like, I had a buddy who was already a programmer who I'd have to pull in all the time, and then he would get annoyed because it was, like, constant, like, help me do this, and he's like, dude, I don't work for you. Like, I don't want to just build all this stuff for you. And, I was trying to do it on my own. Anyway, so I started looking at, like, kind of options for how to do it. And I took some of those, like, very, very intro courses, like, here's how to do some HTML. Here's how to do, like, a program that counts to 5, or, like, whatever the most basic stuff is. And after doing that for a little bit, I realized that the gap from kind of just doing some of that learning to being able to build something that you could use to make a living or to get a job from, the gap was huge. So I started looking for ideas or ways to kind of do that. And I found, one of those programming boot camps. I think they're fairly known nowadays, but it's basically just, a condensed learning block for how to code. I found one of those, and it was actually a really tough decision at the time because I didn't know that if I wanted to do, write code for a living. I didn't know how well the program would work because they're promising to get you a job out of 3 months, whereas it takes 4 years to get a degree. So just the promise seemed a little wonky to me, a little like, usually when I hear stuff like this, it's a scam. So that was a pretty tough decision. And the cost of the boot camp would run me up pretty close to zero on my savings and stuff. So again, like, going back to that piece of the conversation, like, knowing how tight it was going to run my finances made it way more stressful and made me way more nervous. Like, if I had just had twice as much money, which, I mean, it's easy to say have twice as much money, get twice as much money is a different story. But if I had just had twice as much, I think it would have been a much easier decision. Just like, oh, I'm going to invest in this, and then I'll see where it spits me out. But ultimately, I decided, okay, even if it runs me to zero, that's the position I was in, a few years before that, or like almost no savings, and it was fine. So even if I don't get the job, again, going back to worst case scenario, like, I can just get some other job until I learn enough code to either start my own thing or to be able to get a job in the industry. So yeah, I just, after a bunch of deliberation and kind of weighing out the pros and cons, recognizing that it's a very well-paid skill set and a skill set that's going to be useful for far into the future, was kind of what pushed me over the edge, especially in comparison to some of the stuff that I did before, where that work was constantly changing, and some of the things you learned would be not useful anymore. Programming changes pretty fast too, but the core skills stay. So that's pretty much how I ended up pushing into that field.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think again, you kind of had the same choice though, even when you're talking about investing into that coding boot camp. It's a similar piece of the puzzle when you decided to take the risk and go all in, because you hadn't done that, you wouldn't have got these skills and you wouldn't be in the position that you're in right now as well. So you took the first risk to quit your job, and you took the second risk to kind of go push your chips in, when you had nothing in the bank. So I thought that was really interesting too, and another really like great point, just psychologically, not even really logically, just the pushing past the fear and pushing past the limiting beliefs and the doubt, and keeping that abundance mindset to think that you will provide and that it will be fine. And the worst case scenario as well, you can live with, you can deal with. It's funny because your story kind of reminds me of that quote from Marcus Aurelius. I don't know if you heard it. He says, "The obstacle is the way." Is exactly what you did. You had this issue where you couldn't learn code, and I can relate to that too, because I learned about design, like graphic design was a thing for me, like a new thing that I learned. I come from like a film background, where I deal with guys all the time, and they ask me like, is this good video editing? Is this a good film? And you just don't know unless you know it. So I can definitely relate to that. But yeah, turning that obstacle into such an opportunity, I think was really cool, and a really key point as well that you sort of went through.
And I will say one more thing
Yeah,
that I wanted to add before we move past it is that second choice compared to the first choice, which is to say going to the boot camp, compared to quitting the job. Quitting that job was by far the hardest part. Like that second choice, I had already been kind of like in nomad land, wandering around, like kind of figuring stuff out, and also realizing that it was okay. But that first choice was by far the hardest, which is interesting because, after a few weeks, of quitting, it was like, oh, I don't know why I was so in my head about this. Like, I don't know why I was so attached to this and felt like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing? Like when I quit, when I walked out, I was like shaking because I was so like, oh my God, like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, what is going on? And it's just crazy to have, hindsight vision to see like the difference between like how afraid and nervous and terrified I was compared to what I actually experienced, which was just like, like a couple weeks off. And then like, sure, I did some other stuff on the path, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that it wasn't this like super easy, just like, oh, like I've just chosen and now I'm ready to go. Like I was definitely extremely nervous. And then that second choice with the first choice in the back of my mind was like, well, listen, I already did one. Now here's the next one. I wasn't nearly as nervous. I mean, there was still some like, I have no idea what I'm getting into, but I felt more confident after already doing it once.
Yeah, I think humans just really dislike change, like in whatever format that comes into, just they really don't like any sort of change because they fear what that could mean. We get really comfortable, even if we get a lot into like comfortable misery, and sometimes like the excitement and joy is uncomfortable to us, and we can't comprehend being that blissful or being in a state where we're that free. So we will double down on the pain and the prison that we're in, just because we hate change, because change is new and different, and it can be painful. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So with your new skill set, what made you then decide to apply for a job at probably the biggest tech company, in the top 3 biggest tech companies in the world, which is Google?
Yeah, so once I decided to go to the boot camp, and this is another piece of the story that I guess I should have included, but that program was probably 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, something like that. Like it's a complete takeover of your entire life. So when I made that choice, I also made the choice of I'm going to completely invest into getting the skills I need to get into this field at whatever it takes. So I fully expected, all right, I'm going to give up some number of things. And obviously there's some things for me personally that like I will never give up. Like I'll always exercise. I'll find time for that. But like I knew like, okay, there are going to be many things that kind of fall through the cracks, and I'm going to focus solely on this. So before I ever went, I had kind of made a plan. And my background, like I studied psych and health policy, so I knew that first job was going to be rough. So anyway, the bigger plan was basically I'll go to this boot camp. I'm going to work as hard as I can at it. Then as soon as I'm done, I'm going to take a job anywhere I can find a job, because with the background I have, people are going to be skeptical. Like, I feel like I can probably do it, but people are going to be skeptical. And then from there, I'm going to build the skills I need to get into one of these more prestigious institutions. So that was always the game plan, and I had made that before I ever started. And I actually think it's important to highlight before we get like further. Having kind of a purpose and a reason that I wanted to do this and a plan made all the difference. Like, if I had just jumped into it and started learning to code, which is extremely difficult, I would have given up so far, like early. That sentence doesn't even make sense because I'm getting flustered because of how much like I wouldn't have been able to do it. So one of the key things, absolutely critical, was for me to know the most important reason, which was one, I want to do these projects at some point in my life, and I need to know how to code to do them. Even if that means I'm hiring other people and I know the quality. And two, like I am going to be at almost $0, and I will have to like figure out a way to make a living again. So with those two things in mind, that really like pushed me. And then having the plan of kind of like, I'm going to do this piece, then this piece, and this piece. So basically when I got into that boot camp and when I started it, I knew, some people might say like, oh, you had to sacrifice all these things. But I knew like, okay, the way to walk this path is to go really high intensity for this entire time until you hit this goal. I could have done the exact same thing in 4 years probably, and at a much more chill pace. But I knew for me, for my plan, for what I was trying to do, like that was the intensity level. Again, I think I'm getting off track a little bit. Well, what's the question? Rein me back in.
Oh, it was just what made you want to apply for Google. But I think you explained that. You had the plan the whole way to go all in and to double down and to get yourself a bit of a starter job, and then shoot for the top and sort of to go for it. So I guess just walk us through a little bit about when you thought it would be appropriate to just go for Google and just how that all went down.
So I think this is one of the biggest benefits I got out of that boot camp, which is a way to frame looking at jobs that I did not have before this. But essentially, companies like Google have a hiring process that allows you to try once a year or so. So basically, they said, just take all your shots, because it's not like you go there once, have a bad interview, and you're out for good. So I actually applied straight out of the boot camp. And I was taking, like I mentioned, a shotgun approach of like, I will literally move anywhere as long as someone will let me get my foot in the door. And I didn't expect to get a job at Google from that. But, you with that mindset of like, if it doesn't happen this year, you can keep building your skills and do it next year. Then I realized like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, and I think that's one thing that I've seen in other people that I've talked to, is that they think like, okay, I'll only apply to this position when I'm ready. But often those same people, there's never going to be a time when they feel ready, because there's some sort of block, or there's some sort of, putting it on a pedestal of like, oh, it's this amazing thing that like you have to be pristine and perfect to even attempt. And it might be, the strategy might be different if it was like, once you apply, they take all that feedback and they really keep it forever, because then you wouldn't want to go if you're going to get blown out. But that's not how it works. They don't care. So in my mind, it was like, I had already taken, these other 2 risks or whatever, these other choices that kind of like put me on the line. And I just realized like, worst case scenario, I get an interview at one of these companies, which is my end target, and I get blown out. I get a little bit of feedback on what I did wrong, and I try again in a year. So again, it's going back to like this, what is the absolute worst thing that could happen to me? And it's like, I don't get the job. Well, I already don't have the job. So it didn't seem that scary to me.
It's funny because I'm seeing a lot of parallels here that I find with guys in dating, with like an attractive woman. They're like, I'll just wait. I'm not going to approach the woman, or I'm not going to, ask this girl out, or I'm not going to do something because, I'll just wait until I'm a better, no, just go for it. And it's, again, what you lose is really nothing. So I just thought it was a really funny parallel, because I see this all areas of life, women, dating, business, I guess, and investing. Guys, when they're doing their own business, they don't take the hustle to actually take initiative. They go, I'll just wait and, consume the theory and I'll learn. out of some fear that they're not going to make it and they're not going to, it would be unable to bounce back if they somehow encounter a bit of failure. So I think that mindset applies everywhere in life for any type of success.
Yeah, I mean, it goes with that, abundance mindset type thing. When you think the opportunities are finite, you try to like really grasp onto them and like, how do I make sure that I do this perfect? And like, I don't want to lose this. But when you feel like or have realized that the opportunities are plentiful, you can look at it more of a process, which is to say like, okay, I'm going to try this one. And it didn't work. Like, what can I learn from this? Because it applies to interview, dating. It's all roughly, like you said, it applies to many parts of life, but you can't learn some of the things without going through the process. You can do as much theory as you want, and you might get lucky and knock it out of the park. But if you keep taking those opportunities, eventually, like, you're not going to get them if you haven't had experience in the past. Like, you need actual experience to apply the theory, the learnings. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it. So when you can see it as a process, and when you can see all the opportunities and like that's part of the reason that I felt better, is because I was looking at jobs around the world and seeing like, there's no way I can apply for all of these. Like there's no way. So in the same way, like, I guess to tie it back to dating too, like I've never done this, but I imagine if I just went somewhere public, crowded, and just looked at all the people and was like, how many attractive women do I see in this area in just a certain amount of time? Like, how many potential opportunities are there? And this is just one place for like 1 hour or something. I would imagine the number would be high. Like, I don't know. I guess I'm just getting at if there's a way to switch your mindset from this very finite set. And I guess maybe like online dating is a great example, because it goes forever. But like, if you can change it from this finite set to just realizing that there's practically endless opportunities and you just have to keep like attempting them and learning from it, to me at least, that has made my journey much better.
I think the thing for me that really helped me was travel, because I graduated high school when I was about 17, and I moved in Australia, and I moved to New York City, and I lived there for a few years, and I came back to Australia for a bit, and then I moved back to New York, and I went back to Australia, and then I moved to Sydney, which is not where I lived in Australia, and then I moved back to New York, and then I moved to Berlin, and then back to New York, and then to London. So every time I moved to a new place and I traveled, I just realized there's literally infinite potential in every place I go. There's like plenty of job opportunities. There's people to meet, women to date, apartments to live in. There's just infinite everything. So you're really limiting yourself. And I find that a lot with a lot of guys' mindsets. One thing that I often recommend is just like, get out of where you live, like go somewhere else. And you realize that all of the things that you cling on to are available elsewhere. Even if you live in a massive city, like let's say you live in London, which is 8 million people, you could go to Tokyo, which is 10 million people. You could go to New York, which is also 8 million people. So there's really and if you live anywhere smaller than that, you're only going to have more opportunities in a different place. So yeah, for me, travel was really big, but yeah, just that mindset of there is infinite possibility and opportunity for me, and getting out of that scarcity and getting out of fear, I think was really important. So I want to talk a little bit about the process that you went through, which I think a lot of guys are really interested in. There's quite a lot of guys that are in tech that listen to this content, and I'm sure they want to know a little bit about the interview process, how you prepared for it, what it was like, and yeah, how you finally got the job.
Yeah. So I'll give you I guess I did, like, my background, right, is in psych and health policy. So I didn't know anything about coding. So the boot camp was 3 months complete. Like, that's all my time and attention. That's the whole thing. They have their own curriculum. There's not much I can speak to there, but like, I knew at that point, that period of time, like, I'm just going to do whatever they tell me to do. I don't have time for anything else. That was just kind of the fundamentals, or like the bare minimum you would need to get into the industry. But then I also knew there were gaps. So part of that was knowing what curriculum I had learned and knowing what I didn't know. So again, my plan was always, I'm going to get whatever job I can, then I'm going to keep studying and learning and try to get to one of these bigger companies. So there was, the boot camp was 3 months, but it was still another, 15 months before I got that interview at Google. And so in the time between, it took me a couple months to find a job. And then at that job, I was spending time after work going through like a computer science curriculum, like a fake CS degree, which was all online and all free. And for programming specifically, I think this is probably true of most things you want to learn, but there's tons and tons and tons of free resources. So like if you want to learn the stuff, you can learn the stuff. And I kind of took it as, okay, yeah, I'm not going to go through the CS degree like in full. I'm not going to do all the homework. I'm not going to do all the stuff. I already got a degree. I'm not doing this again. But I looked at it as, I'm going to go through these classes. I'm going to listen to the lectures. I happen to listen to stuff really fast, like 2.5, 3 times speed. But I figured, okay, I'm going to listen to all of the lectures to at least get familiarity with some of the concepts, at least get some of the ideas. So I started going through the CS curriculum on my off time while I had that other job, as well as I started listening to podcasts that were, software engineering related, with the intent or the idea of, okay, if I want to get into this field, what I need is kind of saturation into other people in the field. So the schedule was a little more chill. Like I had something closer to a normal life. Like I would say, like a 40-hour normal work week, and then maybe 20 hours a week, which maybe sounds crazy to people, but like studying and doing some other stuff for that year that I was at that company. So those are the couple pieces. One, I was going through like this curriculum of these courses. Then I was listening to podcasts during my commute and stuff. And a lot of the podcasts, I had no idea what they were talking about. No clue. Nothing. I was just, but the idea was with enough exposure, like some of the terms are going to become familiar. Some of the concepts are going to become familiar. And then with the degree thing, the same thing, like, okay, I'm not going to go through all the homework and do all the assignments, because if I want to be a machine learning engineer, like I will have to learn machine learning. Wow, that's a tongue twister. I have to learn machine learning more than what's just in this course. Like I just need to be familiar with kind of the different concepts from these different areas. Then the other piece is, these big tech companies, they all roughly use the same type of interview, which is, a lot of this whiteboarding stuff. So I spent time kind of learning about what they're looking for. And anyone who's started to do some coding knows that's not really how you code day to day. So it was a bit of learning to the test type of thing where like, okay, what they want, someone to be able to solve these little puzzles, these little brain teaser type questions in code. And so there's a great resource it's fairly well known called Cracking the Coding Interview. And it gives you kind of the steps and the resources and the ideas you need to solve some of those. Like just going through that book is a big boost. And that's one of the things that I did after they said they wanted to interview me. So I think it was 9 months after I applied, they contacted me back, which is insane. I was like, Google's the only company that can do this. This is the only place that can say like 9 months later, like, hey, do you want the job? Like most places would be like, what are you talking about? But so I told them I would be ready to interview after another month or two. So the long game, that year, I'm kind of doing this general stuff, like a little bit of practice here, a little bit there. Once I know I'm getting the interview, I spent that month or two going through that book and just spending a ton of time doing those whiteboarding problems, and also talking to other people to do like faux interviews, right? Have other people do whiteboarding stuff, have more experience with that. Like I was saying before with like the theory and the actual practice, right? Like I'd gone through the book, I'd gone through all sorts of different problems preparing, but I hadn't done any like fake interviews. And so I also started doing those so that I had more experience with the process of what I would actually be doing instead of just the knowledge. So yeah, that's kind of the structure of it. And that CS degree thing, like in retrospect, maybe not the best use of time, but at the same time, it filled in all the vocabulary I needed. Because once I got to Google, there were many conversations of things that had I not been working through that, I wouldn't have been able to understand it. So I think that answers the question, maybe. Where are we at?
That's great. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and that's a really good resource. Can you just repeat that book again for any guys?
Cracking the Coding Interview. And it's fairly well known. Like it's a fairly well known resource, but it goes through exactly the kinds of questions, how to answer them, how to think about them, which is much more important than being able to do individual ones. And that's actually something I would like to touch on before I forget, which is as part of those interviews, being able to code is a given. Like they just assume that you're going to be able to know how to code, and the things that you actually need to focus on, unless you don't know how to code, then you need to focus on that. But the things that make you stand out and the things that help a lot are having soft skills. And by that, it just means how you approach problems. And I think because when I had my interviews, there was at least 2 of the questions that I think I completely bombed. Like there was one of the questions that I said, I don't even know what you're asking. Like, I don't know what this is. At which point I was like, okay, there's no way I'm getting this job. Try again next year. But it's very, very important that you develop a strategy or a mindset for solving questions you don't know, or at least working on them, because that weighs at least as heavily as actually being able to solve the problem. Now, depending on like how much experience you have and what level you're going for, like things are a little bit different. I was going for like the most entry level because I don't have the background and I don't have any of the experience. But I think the thing that got me through was the ability to kind of like reason through the problems with the interviewers, even if I wasn't able to solve some of the stuff. That's the only way that I can think of that is possible, that like I was able to make it through.
That's awesome. Yeah, I find that communication is just, you can't escape it. You know, like humans are built to be social, and that's how we trade value. So if you don't have that handled, you know, anything you do in your life has to be done through another human. So yeah, it's such a crucial factor. Likability, relatability, communication, empathy. Yeah, it comes up in everything, even in tech, which is obviously such a, you know, a lot of the skill sets are quite opposite of that. Yeah, that's really interesting. A lot of my friends that I know that are interviewing for similar type positions, that's the area that they're always working on, and that's really interesting to hear you say that. So,
well, one more point real quick. Anecdotally, there are some interviews that I've seen or heard about where individuals are not understanding the question because they're not communicating with the interviewer. And no matter how smart you are, because some of these guys were able to solve problems like close to what the interviewer was asking and much more difficult and able to solve it technically, but they're not even solving the right problem. So it's to me that's kind of crazy because I come from a completely different background. Like, it's crazy to completely misunderstand the question. But I have seen instances where there are people solving something, the interviewer is trying to guide them back towards the correct question, and the communication is just so bad that they end up solving the wrong thing, and then, you know, you have no chance. Like, if you can't communicate at that level, which is just to get the question straight, then there's no chance of making it. And obviously nerves come into play, stuff happens, people get, you know, up in their head and scared about it and whatnot, but those skills I would say are equally as important as the actual coding stuff.
And I guess the next question is, how did your life change since this? Like, how has your life changed since after getting the job? And you know, I don't know your salary before, but how much did you times it by as well? Because we were talking about this before. I'm sure we'll go into this as well. Yeah, what were the big changes in your life after this? On paper, and then also in your psychology and in your well-being.
Yeah, so there's a couple different angles to hit it from. I think I'll start with the job, then I'll move to the salary and stuff. So as far as the job goes, you know, they expect you to know your stuff. Like, the other people that are there who are also hired are very talented, and many of them have been coding for, you know, since they were 10 or whatever else. So the expectations are that you know what's going on. So coming from my background, there's definitely a bit of ramp up, and there's definitely a bit more than a 40-hour work week. Now, that being said, that's what I was already used to. I already prepared to kind of do that through some of the other steps. And I also knew, like, the way that I had framed it was, imagine, you know, a sport you've never really played, like badminton or something. Like, I played some badminton, but I don't know much about it. But then being put on the world team, right? Like, if I got put on that team and everyone expected me to play at a world-class level, like, it'd be like, okay, I'm going to have to practice probably more than some of these other people who've been playing their whole lives. So that's kind of the mindset I had around it. And I think that helped a lot because they don't expect you to work, you know, crazy long, super hard hours, but they do expect you to have a certain baseline. And since I wasn't really there to begin with, a big chunk of my time in the last year or two that I've been there has been ramping up and learning some of these other things. Like, I went in only knowing JavaScript, And even in the initial interview or the initial conversation with teams, they said, like, you need to know Python, you need to know Java. I've never worked in those before. So part of the lifestyle change, I guess what I'm saying is it wasn't all like rainbows and like cookies and free lunch and hangout. There was still, at least for me, a big piece of ramp up. Plus, there's a lot of proprietary technology that only works at Google that also needs to be learned. So the lifestyle kind of didn't change that drastically because I was already working a lot and still working a lot. Now that it's been a year and a half or so, like, calmed it down a little bit, or things feel a bit more manageable, but there's still some ramp up. The other piece, salary wise, that has been a nice change. Let's see, what did I make before? It's probably five times what I was making in that last job. So that has been a very interesting change. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's just amazing if you 5x your salary in 18 months.
Yeah. So that part has been ridiculous. And the job that I haven't talked about much, that place that I was at for a year in between, even that was double what I was making before. So definitely on the salary trajectory, like this. I think now that I'm at one of the bigger companies, it's probably, up towards the top end of where it will be. There's not too many switches that you can make to like skyrocket it again, but it was a huge change. And going back to some of the side project stuff, some of the entrepreneurial stuff, I've noticed how much different of a game it is to work on side projects and invest in side projects when your base is strong. So when I was doing, when I had quit that other job and was kind of off on my own and was just trying to get things figured out like a small business, 100% of that I was doing on my own. And now I have, some projects or some things, and I can start to hire people out. I can start to spend money, and it doesn't feel as scary. It doesn't hurt as much. It's not like, oh, this is my food money. Like, I guess I'm eating ramen because I'm going to try to hire someone to write, this thing or to work on this thing. So that has been one of the biggest changes, and it has been really nice. The other thing that's been a nice change, and I'm still working through this, is I've moved from kind of this grind mentality to like, okay, what do I have to do to make a good living? What do I have to do to get financially stable, to get my feet under me, or like I was talking about before, to build up this kind of base, to have some freedom in what I choose to do with my time. And it has moved kind of from that to, hey, listen, if I don't like this job, as long as I know this coding stuff, as long as I'm working in software, I'm going to be making enough money to be fine. So it has switched a little bit more into, instead of like this grind, learn and grow, even though those are some of the things that drive me, it has switched into, how do I want to design my life? Because let's say that hypothetically the expectations were too large at this company. I can go to another company and I might take a pay hit, but I can keep jumping around, and the baseline salary is always going to be high enough to support my lifestyle, especially the lifestyle that I have. So it's much more now about like, oh, how do I want to fit these pieces together so that things are lined up for me? And like I said, I'm still working through that, because before it's been very much like I'm just going to keep grinding and grinding until I hit this level. But I'm at a point now that if I make more money, like more money is always nice. It gives you more options, more flexibility or whatever. But, making money for the most part, especially when you're selling hours, comes at a cost. So I'm now at the point where I can start making those decisions a little bit differently and start thinking about how I invest my time, and how I make money a little bit differently. But not too much more to speak of on that, because it's a work in progress.
That's awesome. It's really really motivating to hear that, and it's just to even see that it's possible, I guess, for a lot of guys out there. Finally, just like I guess wrapping everything up, what are your big tips? Like, what would be the big takeaways that you would give to a guy who's currently in his job that he doesn't like, working in a desk job or working on whatever job that he doesn't like, that wants to change his career trajectory? Two-part question. What advice would you have for them? What would be your final tips and takeaways? And then the second part, if somebody's interviewing, specifically in tech or just interviewing, because I think that you've been through probably the most stringent interview process that there is. There's not a lot of else out there that is as competitive as that. what tips would you have for someone trying to survive in the interview process and to flourish?
Yeah. So let me think for just a second. I guess the most important part, as far as switching or getting out of that job, is to recognize what it is, or to start charting out a path for what you would like instead, or why you need something to kind of anchor you as you move to the next piece. So for me, it was very easy to go back to during some of those tough times, like up at 2 a.m. trying to figure out how the terminal works, or how to submit code, or how any of this stuff works. It was easier for me to go back to, okay, I'm doing this because in the long term, I would like to be able to build my own thing. And the types of things that I want to build I have to have this skill. I need this skill for what I want. And that bigger purpose was able to push me forward through the tougher times, push me forward through the uncertainty, and get me to keep moving. The other thing that I would think about that I haven't mentioned is basically, if you're at this job that you hate, and what eventually got me to leave was feeling so much pain that it was unsustainable. Like so much pain that it was like, I would rather just take my chances. So the thing to think about is kind of, what is your trajectory, right? If you map yourself 1, 3, 5 years in the future and look back, what are the paths that you potentially could have walked? And I think about myself when I was a little bit earlier in that journey, and I thought about like, okay, 5 years from now, looking back, how am I going to feel about this if I just continue to stay here? Even if I would have gotten that promotion, I may have stayed another year or two or something, or even if I would have kept those responsibilities, when I look back, like that path wouldn't have made sense to me. Like I would have, kept learning and growing up to a point that I would have got frustrated and burnt out because I wasn't in the right field. So I guess what I'm getting at is, one of the things to think about is, how are you going to feel if you stay on that path? Because it's like, had I been able to summarize all the low grade pain I was feeling for a long time, it might have been enough of a push to get me out of it. And then the last piece of that, which I mentioned before, is kind of the actual structure or plan, right? Like we mentioned, if you don't have any money and you just really want to quit, to me, I mean, everybody can kind of, take their own thing from this. But for me, I need a little bit more stability. I don't want to be in a position where I'm desperate without a job and whatnot. And if it is that painful to you that you want to quit, you should be able to save some amount of money. Now, I know everybody's position is different, but like, go out to eat less. Like go, there are ways to cut back and save up. And when I think about things like that, when I think about like, oh, would I rather, go to this restaurant, or have the flexibility to quit this job and try something else? It's a no-brainer. And when I think about it, especially in terms of finite states of happiness, where it's like, how long does this last compared to how long does this last? Like dinner lasts an hour, maybe. And maybe I could have 50 dinners. So cool, 50 hours. Well, that's like barely more than 1 week of work. You know what I mean? So like the calculus when it comes into just individual moments and of pleasure and joy and good experience, to me that helps. I know it's a very logical approach. That's just the way that I tend to think. But those are some of the things that I would start thinking about as you make that transition or think about it. And especially like, it gets so much easier when you get concrete and you say, here's how much money I need to live for a month. Here's how much I need to save for X months. And then you just execute the plan. Once you have the target, it becomes so much easier, because there's a long period of time for me, and I think for other people I've spoken to, where they're in limbo, where they're like, I want to quit, but what am I going to do instead? And if you don't, if that's the idea is just, I don't want to do this, and who knows what'll happen, the chances of executing that are very low. But when you say, okay, I need $2,000 a month, and I would like to have 6 months free to figure something out, that's easy. That's easy. You say, okay, I need to save this amount every month. I'll be there at this, at this time. Next June, I can quit this job or whatever else. And just making everything tangible, really, it just makes it so much easier to execute, so much more realistic. All right, that's the first question. Run me back on the second one.
So number 2 is, what tips would you have for guys that are interviewing and wanting to get a job at a big company? Could be anything, doesn't have to be tech. What are your top tips for passing the interview? Leaving a good impression on the interview, preparing for the interview. What are just a couple takeaways that they could take with them for that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you're going to want to do, or the best use of time, is to do these mock interviews or faux interviews, because it gives you the closest thing to the real experience. And for software, I know that's definitely something that you can get a hold of. There are basically programs out there. I can't remember the names of any of them, but like you can sign up. You get another person who's also preparing for interviews. You guys switch off questions, get some practice. That I think is by far the number one thing that you can do, because it's the closest, right? It's like we talked about before. You can get all the theory, you can get all the strategy, you can get all the ideas, but what you need is the actual experience, and that's what brings your skills up the most. So that's the number one thing I would do if you're not going to do anything else. The other thing that I would do is kind of gauge your effort relative to the company you're applying to and how important it is to you. So, for example, I applied to, I think, 200 maybe companies right after I graduated that boot camp. And some of them I was like, oh, these are really interesting. And some I was like, I guess I'll take this job. Like, this is good enough that I'll do it. And I would scale my prep to how important they were to me. So, for Google, like I gave them basically 2 months of prep. Now, again, it's not like a one-off thing. It's not like Google specific things, but I paid attention to, I learned exactly the style that they were going to use, and then tailored my efforts and my practice to that. Probably not everyone's going to want to do that for every job. Like I definitely didn't want to. If it was some other random company, I maybe gave them, a couple hours, or I gave them nothing. I fired off the resume and whatnot. And if they answered, then I did a little bit of research. So I think that's one thing to do, is to look at the company you're going to interview for. You ask for interviews specifically. So like if you're already getting an interview, you should spend some time looking at what the company does. And it doesn't have to be 2 months, but you should spend a few hours getting an idea of what they do and how your skill set might be relevant there, as well as how that company fits into your journey. Because one of the things that you want to be able to do is give a coherent narrative as to why this position fits for you and you fit for this position. And I think that's another thing to hone in on is, if you're really desperate for a job, it sort of can come across in the way that, like, oh, I just need this job at all costs. But when you're in a more stable position, like let's say you have a job, you're looking to get out of it into something else. When you recognize that like you have a baseline to fall back on, and you can approach it with the mindset of, is there mutual fit here? Not, hey, am I good enough to be at this place? Hey, do these people want me? Because then that comes across as like, you need validation. You're seeking validation. And subtly that comes across. When you can get more into the mindset of, this is a mutual interview. Sure, they might be asking most of the questions, but practically every place leaves time for questions at the end. Ask questions. Approach it like it's a mutual interview. Because that approach, and there are all these micro things you can do and focus on, but that broader strategy approach gets you in the right place to think about how you should be acting to make a good impression. And there may be times, and everyone's situation is different. Like if you really, really need a job, it's going to be tough. But if you, are doing this kind of transition thing, you don't have to take the job. You don't need the job, even if your job sucks. So just try to find that mutual fit. And for me, like that opened up my mindset so much, and that made me just have conversations that were so much better, and it makes you more engaged. It automatically kind of starts bringing out the types of behaviors that employers are looking for, which are people that are curious and interested and like the product and kind of have an idea of why they want to be at the company or why it fits. So that's the second piece, is just kind of crafting this more coherent narrative around, here's the reason that this job fits me and I fit this job, as opposed to, I need this and I hope you guys like me.
That's awesome. And again, massive parallel with social life, new relationships, dating, exactly the same. Exactly the same. Yeah, you have to know your own value and realize that everything is a negotiation anyway. There's always, you have your own value and you have your value to provide. So it's always a trade. It's never just going to be one way. I think that's a really valid point. Well, yeah, I think that's it, man. I think we ticked it all off. There was just so much value in that video. I think that was awesome. To the lads watching, thank you so much for being with us. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I really appreciate it. And to Donovan, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it was nice. I'm glad that somebody sat me down and forced me to actually say all this stuff out because people ask and then I don't do it. So it'll be nice to have the resource for people to go back to and actually check out. And it's been a good time.
Oh yeah, for sure. And yeah, thanks guys. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you next time.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. Reflect, take action, and enjoy life. See you next time.